The only thing better than a tailgate at Beaver Stadium on a beautiful fall day is when my kids are coming home for a tailgate at Beaver Stadium on a beautiful fall day. And this weekend, they're going to be feasting on a couple of my tailgating fall favorites. I'm going to be handing out my apple, raisin, and pecan streusel muffins for breakfast and serving up my succulent crock-pot apple and onion pulled pork sandwiches for dinner. Let's get started. We're going to start by getting our pork in the crock pot. And I've got a 6-pound pork shoulder, otherwise known as a pork butt. And if you're wondering about that name, it dates back to colonial times when these inexpensive cuts of meat were stored in casks or barrels that were called butts. And they were shipped from Boston to the colonies. And when they arrived wherever they were at their destination, the people would simply say, the Boston butts have arrived, or the butts from Boston have arrived. So I've melted 4 tablespoons of butter in my electric skillet, and I'm going to heat this to about 300 degrees. And I like my electric skillet because it's got the surface area to really brown this on both sides and brown it really evenly, and I can control the heat. And if you're cooking for a big crowd, you can even fit 2 of these in the skillet. And I'm going to season this liberally with garlic powder, fresh grinding of sea salt, and pepper. I like to use a peppercorn blend because it's got a lot of great different peppery flavors in it, but black pepper is just fine. And I'm going to brown this pork on both sides, and it's going to take about 10 minutes per side. And while this first side is browning, we're going to get our other ingredients into the crock pot. And I'm starting with 2 really big onions that have been coarsely chopped, and about 3 or 4 really nice sized apples. These are Fuji's, and I just picked them off of my tree last night. So they're going in. Now I've got some aromatic spices and seasonings. I'm going to add 2 whole cinnamon sticks, 2 whole bay leaves, 6 whole cloves, and 6 whole allspice. And I'm going to season this mixture with the same seasonings I used for the pork. Nice amount of garlic powder, nice amount of sea salt, peppercorn blend to taste, and I love pepper, so I use a copious amount in my pulled pork sandwiches. It's been about 18, 19 minutes, and this is golden brown on both sides, and I'm just going to very carefully stick my fork in and pick this up at one end. See how beautifully brown that is on the bottom? And that's the fat side, known as the fat cap, or the top side. And we're going to very carefully, we're just going to pick this up and put it into the crock pot, fat side up, and that's the side with all of those wonderful seasonings. Now I'm going to add a 1/2 cup of apple juice to our pan. I'm going to use a spatula to deglaze this. Gets all those wonderful brown bits loose from the bottom. This is where all of your flavor's at right now, folks. Now I'm going to carefully unplug my skillet. And as soon as this subsides just a little bit, and again, I'm working kind of backwards here, I'm left-handed, so I'm going to try to do this without hurting myself. I'm going to take my skillet and I'm going to pour all of these drippings into my crock pot. I'm going to put the lid on here and program this to cook on high for 2 hours, on low for 6 hours, and on warm for 2 hours, and then it's time to pull our pork. And a little tip from Mel is when it comes to tailgating, I like to do this right before I go to bed at night so that in the morning it's cooked all night long and it's ready for me to pull the pork and take it to the stadium. Are you ready to make some apple muffins? I adore these. And I have a love-hate relationship with muffins because I like the ones I bake and I like some of the ones my friends bake, but I really don't like the ones I buy in stores because they tend to be overly sweet. My muffins are not. They're just a great way to start the day. And we'll start with our streusel topping, and I have a 1/4 cup of flour, 1/2 teaspoon of allspice, cinnamon, and sugar. Stir it around in this bowl. I've got 2 tablespoons of butter that I've cut into cubes, and it's really cold. You don't want your butter to be soft. And I'm going to use this pastry blender and a sharp knife. And this process is called cutting the shortening, which is the butter. Cut in the shortening, which is the butter. If you see that in a recipe instruction, this is what it's meant to do. It's meant to leave it in little pieces, just cut it into the mix. And streusel topping is, of course, a coarse, crumbly topping. And I'm going to add a 1/2 cup of chopped pecans. There is no reason to toast your pecans ahead of time because they are going to toast or roast when they get put on the top of the muffins. Okay. Now, this. Just going to stir this around. That's all there is to making streusel topping, and now I'm just going to set this off to the side, and I'm going to stir together my dry ingredients, which is a 1/2 cup of flour, 1/2 cup of sugar. I've got a teaspoon of allspice and cinnamon, teaspoon of cinnamon, a 1/2 teaspoon of allspice, baking soda and baking powder. Whisk those together. So now my dry ingredients are done too. And we're going to mix our wet ingredients next. Mixing the wet ingredients is almost as fast as making the streusel. And mixing the dry ingredients, I have 2 big eggs. I'm using jumbo eggs. You can use 3 large if you like. I'm going to give them a really good whisk in the bottom of this bowl. I am going to add a cup of sour cream. Just going to keep my muffins really moist and give them a nice tangy flavor. Just going to give that a quick whisk. Now I'm going to add about a teaspoon of vanilla extract. And I buy a nice organic, and it's easy to find, but it's apple extract, which really boosts the flavor. And while I'm whisking this, I'm going to drizzle in 1/2 stick of melted butter. Really good whisk. Switch to a spatula, fold in 1/2 cup of chopped pecans, 1/2 cup of raisins. I like golden raisins. Feel free to use dark raisins. And a cup of chopped, unpeeled apples. No reason to peel your apples. Fold this all together. And now all I am going to do is add my wet ingredients to my dry ingredients. Now at this point, I can bake my muffins an hour from now as long as I don't add these to the dry ingredients, because once I do, the liquid in the wet is going to activate the double-acting baking powder and baking soda. So the second the wet ingredients go in, you really have to fill your muffin cups and bake them immediately. Smells wonderful, and they're not even baked yet. Now muffins are kind of a form of quick bread, and quick breads are exactly quick. The second all of your ingredients come together and they're just coated, you stop mixing. You never want to overmix a quick bread or a muffin. Now I've got 12 standard muffin pans, muffin tins, that I have sprayed with some no-stick spray. You can take the time to butter and flour them if you want to. I don't recommend using paper liners when baking muffins because it keeps the outside from browning. I save my paper muffins for things like bready muffins, like corn muffins and cheese muffins. So I'm not going to use those today. I'm going to pick up a 2.5-inch ice cream scoop. And I'm just going to put a scoop of batter each of my muffin cups. This is really fun to do. Try to get them as level as possible so they all bake evenly. And now for the streusel topping. I'm going to take about a tablespoon. I clean this up a little bit after I've filled the tins with the topping. I just push, if you want to be a perfectionist, you can just push the things that kind of spilled on the sides back into the muffin cups. Use up the last of that streusel on anybody who looks like they need a little more streusel. Now I'm going to pop these into a 350-degree oven for about 18 minutes, and the muffins will be ready to eat. Because I couldn't keep our hungry camera crew here 8 hours today, I actually made some pulled pork last night. And I used a slotted spoon to remove all of my apples and onions from the liquid. I took the pork roast out and I began pulled it into bite-sized pieces with my fingertips. The bone pulls right out, slippery smooth and meat-free. And the first thing I do is I mix my pork with my apples and onions, and I'm going to begin adding the drippings to the pulled pork. And the secret is to only add enough so that it moistens and flavors the meat. You don't want a soggy mess up in your pulled pork sandwich. Just enough for flavor. And I'm going to start with about a half cup. And as I mix, I'm going to take my time and allow it to sit about 2 or 3 minutes in between additions of the drippings to allow the pork to actually absorb all of the liquid. When you live in Happy Valley, all roads lead to Beaver Stadium. And for me, there's no two ways about it. Tailgating is my favorite sport. It's all about fun, friends, and food. You can't lose at tailgate. For these and all of my Happy Valley recipes, just go to my website.